what leaders really need is a toolkit, like a muscle group to grow, to prepare themselves to power through these moments of truth and to be able to bounce back. At the personal level, I am incredibly empathetic, sympathetic, and appreciative of a young rising star leader today who's looking ahead 10, 15, 20 years. They're going to lead this whole thing. And we owe it to them to equip them with the best probability that they can power through it and thrive.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Brian Fetherstonhaugh, who's an executive coach, board advisor, and CEO at the Longview Talent Group. Brian is also the author of the best-selling book, The Long View, Career Strategies to Start Strong, Reach High, and Go Far. During the episode, we talk about Brian's transition from global chairman and CEO to worldwide chief people officer at Ogilvy. We also talk about what it means to be a resilient leader and the 5 great principles for confronting a crisis. And lastly, we talk about how you can serve the next generation of leaders by making them more resilient. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on notification bells so you never miss an episode. With that being said, let's jump in. Welcome to the show, Brian. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. It's been a while. How are things? How are family?
Family are outstanding, and it's so great to see people getting back into the swing of things and live events and traveling again. I think we're like little golden retriever puppies who are just so happy to be out in the park. It's a new chapter, and I really like it.
Was it exciting for you to get back on the road as well?
It was. I used to travel about 150 days a year, probably for 2 or 3 decades, and then it went to almost 0. And I really missed it, partly business and partly personal, but it is great to be back on the road.
Nice. Listen, before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit about you personally and your journey to where we are today, because you have quite a fascinating career.
So I grew up in Canada, in Montreal, and grew up there, went to school there. I started my career way back at Procter & Gamble, also in Canada, very traditional brand management, but great early discipline, which I really appreciated. And then fell in love with the sort of creative part of business and became a part of the Ogilvy Group and later WPP. And grew up through the ranks. I was the CEO of the Ogilvy company in Canada as a pretty young guy. And one day, with a young family growing up in Toronto, I had a knock on the door to come to headquarters to work on some very big pieces of global business, which I did. So I took on a 2-year assignment at our headquarters in New York, which was like more than 20 years ago. So it kind of stuck. I'm still in New York. And
You're still there?
I'm still there and have done a range of global jobs since then. So it was a very kind of pivotal move. I wouldn't have predicted, Chris, that it would have been something that lasted. I love Canada still my home, but New York and the global stage has been really tremendous. So once I got to New York, I ran a portfolio of global brands, set up this global brand group for the Ogilvy Group, more than $1 billion of business with Nestle and IBM and Cisco and IKEA and so forth. So fascinating look across all kinds of different categories. And then I had an opportunity to become the global chairman and CEO of our digital group called Ogilvy One. And we grew that into a big business of more than 5,000 people, and just fantastic being at some of the early and mid stages of digital transformation, again, working with great clients. And we operated in 80 countries. And I was well on my way to just retiring and maybe teaching and consulting. And an opportunity came up about 5 years ago. The chief people officer of the overall Ogilvy Group, about 20,000 people.
Yeah, that's what surprised me the most when I connected with you. Is like, how did you go from CEO to global worldwide chief people officer? That was a move that I haven't seen much.
So I was always like a business guy with a very strong talent point of view. For those of you who know the professional services or agency business, 60% of every dollar you earn goes to staff costs. It's a very simple, there's a little bit of office, there's a couple of computers, there's a tiny bit of software. It's, the ultimate people business. So in order to be a CEO, I really needed a strong point of view on talent, and I certainly had a big belief in talent. And so as I was contemplating, I was going to go do something different, probably consulting and teaching. This opportunity came up to replace an outgoing chief people officer. I'd written a book a number of years earlier while I was still a CEO of Ogilvy One. I did it just as a side project, and it was on career strategy. It's a book called The Long View on how people can start strong, reach high, and go far in their careers. So with that bit of background plus this strong point of view, the group CEO says, would you like to be the next chief people officer? And 12 hours later, I was the global chief people officer of this large multidisciplinary group. And fantastic job, fantastic experience. So I then sort of flipped from being a business guy with a talent point of view to a talent guy with a strong business point of view. And that's what I did for 4 years at Ogilvy, and then worked with the parent company, WPP, as a talent advisor for about a year and a half beyond that.
Wow. It's such a fascinating story. No, I'll be interested to know, what was your views of what you thought that role entailed versus when you got in the seat? Was there a big shock to what you thought the role of a CPO was from the outside to then being on the inside and being like, oh, wow, this is really what it means?
I certainly gained a tremendous respect for the function and the position. I honestly believe I can't think of a more difficult job in this world. Maybe somebody involved in deep cybersecurity where, there's nothing but bad news. But the role of the CHRO, or Chief People Officer, it's so multifaceted. And it also is subject to a thing I call like the dump effect, where C-suite executives, they have a problem, they dump it on HR. They dump COVID. They dump Me Too. They dump diversity, equity, and inclusion. They dump compensation issues. They dump, some technology issues. So it's a highly, highly accountable, fast pace. There's so much to do in the here and now that it's often hard to get ahead of it and think about the future of talent, the future of work. So it's a very, very challenging position. So I would say biggest realization was this is a difficult, super challenging, short-term and long-term job. So I really, really grew to appreciate it.
Yeah. No, and I think now the next one to that point of that list is probably going to be the recession that's impending. Is probably going to be dumped on HR next.
You know what's coming, which is we're all, as talent leaders in different ways, we are going to face another big round of very tough choices.
Yeah.
We are going to need to contend with all of that operating in a hybrid world where, we're dislocating. We used to have quite geography-based talent plans and compensation plans and reward plans and development plans. And so the structure and certainty of a geographical-based labor force is kind of going away. So once again, into the breach goes the HR function, and just tremendous cognitive load on chief people leaders, but also a very, very heavy emotional load. So buckle up. And one of the things I focus on is resilience. And I think that's a critical factor across all business leaders, but maybe most acutely among chief people officers.
Yeah. How do you just define resilient leadership?
So resilience to me is the ability to embrace change, the ability to overcome adversity, and the ability to bounce back. So let's face it, as we look ahead in the future of work, there's a couple of unstoppable forces the digitization of everything. That's not going to stop. It's this relentless force that's plowing through every industry, every business model, every employee relationship, every customer relationship. Unstoppable force number one. The other massive force, which is sometimes underappreciated, is the complete generational turnover of leadership in big companies and organizations in the world. So boomers are moving on, which is not a horrible thing. It's a very beautiful, natural thing. But X, Y, and Z, or Z, are coming in. X is leading, Y is coming up, and Z and maybe Alpha are becoming the next, the new employees. That's your new onboard intake of talent. And if you just think about the implications of, a cohort coming in, you take X and Y with different skills, different expectations, fortunately a much different and healthier view of diversity, equity, and inclusion, grown up in different ways, appreciation for things social and things digital. So that middle one, another massive unstoppable force. And the third unstoppable force is the ascendancy of well-being in the workplace, where it's not just, the healthcare system and parents take care of people. Companies need to take care of people. Employees will not tolerate companies that are unhealthy, that don't fit with their total lives, maybe work-life balance, different aspects of mental wellness, physical wellness. So those are the three big unstoppable forces. So resilience comes in. How can you appreciate it and just be at peace with the fact it is going to change and it will not stop changing, and it doesn't go away after pandemics or recessions. It's not to do with that. It's bigger than those things. They just accelerate it. So what people need, they're getting this massive load coming in, unstoppable, and they don't need little cheerleading. Hey, it'll be okay, or even worse, suck it up, crybaby. We have problems too. Completely useless, completely unhelpful. So what leaders really need is a toolkit, like a muscle group to grow, to prepare themselves to power through these moments of truth and to be able to bounce back. At the personal level, I am incredibly empathetic, sympathetic, and appreciative of a young rising star leader today who's looking ahead 10, 15, 20 years. They're going to lead this whole thing. And we owe it to them to equip them with the best probability that they can power through it and thrive, not just wave the white flag and survive, but really get through it. So that's why I'm working so much in the area of resilient leadership.
So we mentioned the book already, The Long View. Why did you write this? What was the inspiration behind that?
So I'd been speaking on the topic. Again, I was a business executive with a strong view of talent, and I'd been speaking many, many years on the topic of talent and career leadership. And I wrote an article for Fast Company. An earlier form of it was called Career Fuel, and the notion that we acquire certain kinds of fuel that carry us, propel us through our long careers. And it got 50,000 hits. It's like, oh, okay, that was pretty good. And then someone said, maybe you should write like a small book, like a Kindle single or something like that, 10,000 words. And I eventually was kind of talked into doing a full book, which, remember, I was running a 5,000 person company in 75 or 80 countries at the time, working 60 hours a week. And this was a side project on my own. So this was nights, weekends, and long airplane trips to Asia. And it took me about a year, and wrote it. And part of the motivation was, I now have millennial aged kids. They're entering the workforce, they're asking questions. The average age in my company at Ogilvy, the median age was 28. So I had a lot of young people coming in and thinking about careers, and people were saying careers don't matter anymore and nobody's loyal. And I didn't believe that. I believe careers are very different, that you can't just depend on the rules of the past, but there are some fundamentals that are enduring. And the shock for everybody is careers last 40 plus years. We have more years of career after the age of 40 than before. And so however you do it, you need to take
Need a plan.
a longer view of what goes into a long and happy career. So that was the motivation, and wrote the book, and was happy to have done it. And it's targeted not just to millennials, but it's start of career, middle of career, and even end of career. Call it.
Are they the three stages?
Stage 3 of a year. Yeah.
Yeah. You also, what I thought was interesting, which I'd love for you to share with the audience, and I saw this a long while back, which is still as relevant today, is those 4 golden questions that you talk about that you should ask yourself once a year. Could you share a bit more about that?
Sure. So there, the golden career health questions are very simple. Number 1, look back previous 6 months or year. Am I learning? Number 2, am I having impact? Number 3, am I having fun? And number 4, am I fairly rewarded? And I encourage people to, periodically look back. You can even rate yourself from 1 to 10 on these dimensions and sort of make some conclusions. But those to me are the 4 most powerful questions. Not, can I make more money at X, or, do they have a better dental plan? But, more profoundly, am I learning? This is probably the most critical one, Chris, because if you get a bad score on that one and you can't fix it in your current organization, I always counsel people to leave that organization. Mm-hmm. You cannot, especially early in your career, if you're in a chronically low learning environment, what I call, not enough career fuel, you're not getting the skills, you're not getting the experiences, you're not meeting the people that's propelling you forward, that's deadly. You really need to act. And then impact, sometimes you change the world, sometimes you change, you have impact on your team or company. Fun, we're going to spend 100,000 hours plus working in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
It better be fun. There better be elements of joy. And then the last one, which is, are you fairly rewarded?
It's interesting because I started my career at 17. I never went to school or university, and I was in the company for 10 years. And that's why I left, is I was in the same role. I was sales executive, sales manager, sales director, but then I kind of got to the point where I was in that role for maybe 4 years. And I was doing the same thing over and over again. I didn't feel like I was learning or growing. And I was like, I just can't stay here. And I tried to find other paths. Like I was like, can I kind of move into operations, or can I move into marketing and product? Because I was really interested in that side. And I was told, stay in your lane, Chris. You're in sales. That's what you're good at. And I was like, but I'm not learning anything. I started getting bored. I was like, I'm coming to work every day. It's just becomes repetitive. And as much as I love my team and I was making great money and I had the dream job, for many of my family members, like, don't do it, don't leave. It's amazing. I was like, I just can't, I'm not excited about getting up and going to work every day.
Well, that's the critical one. And again, you correctly spotted, if that learning curve is flat and it's not going anywhere, that's a great reason to look around and try and find some new, steeper way to get the skills and experiences and relationships that will really matter over the long haul. So well done.
Yeah, I took the extreme version of starting a company, which is an infinite learning curve.
That is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a never-ending learning curve.
That's a very steep curve.
Yeah. I want to go back to your what we spoke about around our leadership. What can we do then as HR leaders, as businesses, to help prepare these managers and leaders, to lead in a VUCA world that's ever changing?
So I spent about a year and a half looking at the future of work, and then I spent a bunch of that time looking at more traditional learning and development programs and leadership development. And I must say that there was a pretty serious gap, that traditional L&D or leadership development programs are not getting to this issue of resilience. And I think it's quite behavioral. And so let me, if you're interested, I'll take you through the big five that I think create
Great.
more resilient leaders. Number one, the leader needs to know themselves, what they stand for, and who stands with them. And the reason that is so important is in a moment of crisis and change, that you're constantly assaulted, new questions, you don't have enough time to make decisions. You need to understand your core values, and you need to understand who's with you. So who are your allies? Who can you depend on? Who can you consult with? You cannot do this alone. No chance. So resilience is not just inner fortitude, but it's inner plus your allies. Point number one. Point number two is really thinking strategically about how you invest your time. We all know one-trick ponies. We all know people who work so hard that they burn themselves out at age 32 or 38 or 41. Just when it's getting interesting and the big jobs are ahead, they're burnt out. They can't work another minute. Part of that has to do with bad time investment. I believe people should work lots and have a big chunk of their portfolio, their time portfolio I talk about, devoted to work. But it's the other things that actually energize the work piece. It's like investing and having a diversified strategy. So do you have, family time? Do you have zombie open time where you're doing nothing? Do you have time devoted to community that might restore some of your faith and energy? Do you do teaching and learning? Teaching and learning, a little slice of teaching and learning in the course of a week can energize all the other 60 hours of your work life. So I'm a big believer in mapping it out. Where are you today? And a lot of people that I talk to, very ambitious people, 60, 65, 70, 75. I had a senior lawyer the other day who was so proud because she had 85 hours of work in a week. I go, you're going to kill yourself.
We're
And you
proud
won't
in
see your-
terms of the money that they made
you
for those
won't you won't
hours?
see your kids grow up.
Yeah.
Is that what you really want to do? So you take that portfolio and then you set up a more ideal one. And then there's some strategies for going from point A to point B. So having a diversified time portfolio is an aspect of resilience, just like your investment portfolio needs different asset classes to make it through recessions and high interest rates and so on and so forth. You need a diversified time portfolio. Point number three, daily energy. And daily energy has to do with, do I have intent? This is real calendar stuff. Do you have intent? What are you trying to accomplish today? And something I call a SMIT, single most important thing today. Every day in my calendar has a SMIT. You need gratitude. It just frames what you're going into for the day. You need to move your legs and lungs. You don't need to be a triathlete. You need to move your legs and your lungs. And the lungs are critical. I used to be really skeptical, but breathing exercises, yoga, whatever. I am totally converted. Breathing for business leaders, which isn't same as breathing for monks in a cave in the Himalayas. But it's, you got a board call coming up in 15 minutes. There's a style of breathing that helps you activate, the relax and recover mode of your body. It's already built in there. It just draws it up, and you can perform better when you're not.
What type of breathing is that? Is that like box breathing or things like
Yeah,
that?
I use, Chris, a form of box breathing. It's called star breathing, where
Okay.
again, on the inhalation and the long exhalation, you just teach yourself to get into rhythm. It activates the vagus nerve and
Yeah.
different aspects of your system. And I use a mantra. So you draw a picture of it, you draw a picture of a star in your mind as you're breathing in and breathing out. And I also use a mantra I'll talk about in a moment, which is I'm strong but warm. So as a leader, you make decisions, you make tough calls, you do your homework, but how you deliver it is
With empathy.
warm and human and empathetic. So if you're going into a board meeting and someone says, "What the heck are we going to do about X?" You bring in your strong and warm leadership self, and hopefully, kind of relaxed. And that brings me to sort of point number 4, which is lead like the velvet hammer. We all know people who are super pushy. We all know people who are pushovers. In the middle is the space, the velvet hammer, and the characteristics of that. It's a win-win leadership strategy, and strong and warm are some of the leadership attributes. Good listeners. When they make decisions, they tell people why they made decisions. It's just a better, especially in this world of empowered employees and so much change going on. It's an excellent long-term strategy. So number 4 is the velvet hammer approach. I think it makes people more resilient. And the final one is just studying and tapping into your own resilient mindset. How do I power through a moment of truth? Sometimes all this other stuff, like you got a crisis. How do you deal with a crisis? So you look at how Nelson Mandela got through things. You look at how, war veterans come back with catastrophic injury. How do they carry on? You frame your adversity so that maybe that meeting isn't the worst thing that's ever happened in humankind. I had a great leader, Chris, Shelley Lazarus, who was the group CEO at Ogilvy for many years, very, very successful. And she used to say, "Brian, I think we're going to have a really bad meeting, but they're not going to take away our children."
Yeah, like
I'm pretty sure they're not going to take away our children. So it's like, you know what? Just get through it. And we all get through it. So this combination of 5 factors, and people can get into these habits and do the exercises for themselves, and there's a workbook process and so forth. It just gives them a fighting chance of embrace change, power through adversity, and the ability to bounce back. So I think that's just a critical element
I love it.
of leadership development for the future. And most stuff, it's like, take 2 e-commerce courses and call me in the morning, or, here's our new DE&I format, which is important, but it's not the whole picture.
Yeah. How do you think this should be delivered then? Because I think that's something which is super important, a lot of what you're talking about.
Yep.
Because I feel like people are just copy and pasting the in-person experience online and many other methods which just don't work.
So I definitely designed it as a face-to-face small group, 15 people, up to 15 people in a room. And that's still principally how I deliver it when I do this kind of stuff. Half-day workshops, full-day workshops. You can do it in a half day if you top and tail. You do some advanced prep and you do some Zoom follow-up. So, it's still, I've done an introduction to this topic, sort of the longer version of what I just took you through, and you can do that in an hour or a couple of hours on Zoom. It's a hybrid approach. It needs the face-to-face, including interacting with other team members, some expressions of personal vulnerability, etc. So it's a hybrid approach, but you can carry a fair chunk of it in thoughtful Zoom or video.
Mm-hmm.
There's a piece in the middle
who should be
where
leading
you need
this?
to, role playing and, some self-examination, self-reflection, rehearsal, practicing things that need to be done live.
Yeah. Who do you think should be leading this in companies?
I beg your pardon?
Who do you think should be leading this in companies?
This needs to be embraced at the top. It can't, chief people officer, if they can convince other C-suite executives. It needs to be embraced at the C-suite. It doesn't always need to be done at the C-suite. I found quite a bit. A C-suite leader will introduce it to their direct reports. Number of situations like that. Can be a part of ongoing L&D. Certainly, it's for tenured leaders, but that can be 5 years, not 25 years. So I've done a rising star version and a very senior version. And I think it works in both places. It's great when the bosses at least appreciate what
Of
you're trying
course.
to do. So it cascades better this way than this way.
Yeah. No, I think it's an important question because many people listening are like, oh, I'd love to do this internally. What does that look like? How do I get the
Yeah,
buy-in? Who should be leading it? Is it owned by HR, etc.? What does that
yeah,
look like? Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. Yeah. Before I let you go, we've covered so much, and I also wanted to get into some of the other stuff that I've seen you post on LinkedIn, but we'll save it for next time. I know one of the things the 5 truths that you spoke about around hybrid work. I wish we could do another episode about that, so maybe we have to reconnect.
yeah.
But what advice would you give? As you said, it's been a tough time to be a HR leader right now, and a lot of what we discussed earlier in the call that's been pushed onto HR. What advice
Yeah.
would you give to them before I let you go? And then also, where can they connect with you personally if they want to reach out to you and connect?
Yeah. So just on, advice for HR, I think that they should, HR leaders, again, with these wicked roles, spend time in your own personal resilience. Many of you have 10, 20, 15, 30 years of career ahead of you. And it will continue to be very, very challenging. So I would spend time on your personal resilience and some of those principles that I spoke of. The other thing is, I think you, as a HR leader, we're often wired to say yes. CEO says, fix the compensation system. I can do that. Someone says, we have these issues with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Go ahead and fix that and give me a report. These are massive, complicated jobs. And I would just use, conditional yeses. I will take that on if you can commit X resource. I will take that on if you will commit, a monthly exposure and monitoring of the C-suite and their own behavior. I will take that on if. So I think using the conditional yes, not the unconditional yes, would be quite wise advice. You look at the year ahead, Chris, the next 2 years, it's going to be as challenging as, different challenging, but challenging nonetheless. And I'd urge, these wonderful, accountable, and highly enthusiastic HR leaders to use conditional yeses with their CEOs and with their C-suite brothers and sisters to help them get through.
Love that. And where can they connect with you if they want to reach out to you personally? Where's the best
So
place?
I am Brian at longviewtalent.com. Brian Fetherstonhaugh. I'm on LinkedIn, obviously. And so Brian at longviewtalent.com is probably the best and easiest place.
Well, listen, as always, for everyone listening, those links are already below. So whether you're watching the show or listening to the show, there'll be links to connect with Brian on LinkedIn and also the website there. So make sure you go and connect with Brian and reach out. But thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm glad we managed to connect. And really happy to see you doing well and back on the road and all the great work you're doing. And as always, I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing. And I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Well, Chris, thank you for mobilizing this community, this extraordinary community of talent leaders, people leaders around the world, and sharing experiences. So you're doing very interesting work. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. See you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.